Hey, Daniel Brigham here, and I'm at DevLearn this week, and I realize a lot of you would like to come, but can't for a lot of different reasons. So I thought I'd give you a recap of day one. I'll do this for day two and day three. I went to 5 sessions today, give you a brief key takeaways on those 5 sessions. The first one was with Cami Bean, who works for Kineo. It was called Top Tips for E-Learning Design, and it basically just a discussion on top tips. The biggest key takeaway I got out of that discussion was there's basically 3 things that e-learning can do. The first sort of thing it can do, or bucket, is creating awareness of information. It does that pretty well. Second bucket is teaching a person a skill or a process, and it does that pretty well. That's sort of that second level. And the third bucket it can do is change behavior. Now, it doesn't always do that, right? Probably more often than not it doesn't. We'd like it to, but it doesn't. She suggested, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough for e-learning, especially just like a one-off course, to tee up behavior change versus, taking that on our shoulders as developers. Made me feel a little better. She also had an interesting point about how there's a tendency for e-learning developers to over-design. So if there's this relatively simple thing that needs to happen, like a PDF doc or a short 2-minute video, don't create a course around that. Just do the simple thing. So that was that first session. Second session was with Jane Bozarth, and you can look up these names if you're interested. You just go to DevLearn 2013 and obviously find out more about them. So second session, Jane Bozarth, called Show Your Work, the Payoffs and How-Tos of Narrating Work. And the big idea here is we amplify the work we do by sharing it. So she talked about a couple benefits to sharing your work. You sort of get clarity about why you're doing what you're doing, and I think that's true. Other benefits, it gives you recognition, of course, helps you build your portfolio, and it's a cool way to give back. Ways to share, she came up with sort of 3. Well, this is how I do it, like whether it's a screener or a blog. This is why I did it that way, whether it's a screener or a blog where you give 2 options you could have gone, kind of why you went the way you went. And my personal favorite is, hey, this is what I'm working on and I need some help. You don't think about asking help as sharing, but it is. It's like asking honest questions on the forum. It really is a version of sharing. How to share. Some tips there were, choose the right medium. I thought for this quick sort of rough conversation, a video would be the best. For you it might be a blog or taking a picture or doing a screener. Invite people into the conversation. You can ask them, you ask for help. You can ask them what they're working on if you work in an organization. What are you proud of this week? What are you struggling with? People are going to talk about their work anyways. We might as well get them, talking about it in hopefully a more helpful way. So that was the second presentation. The third presentation was the keynote, Jeremy Goucher's keynote, Unlocking Cool. I have to admit I was a little distracted on this one. Had got up earlier, but whatever. But there was one quote I know as a freelancer. The quote was, "How can you become irresistible to a specific group of people?" And he was talking about really, honing in on your really target market. So you think about those clients or those people that you do work for. How can you become irresistible to them? He didn't really talk about it, but I have a feeling it has to do with helping them solve their problems. So that was the third session. Fourth session was with Carl Kapp, who's a major player when it comes to gamification, called 5 Things Game Designers Can Teach Instructional Designers. A couple points here. 1, require action right away. That action has a way of just drawing in the learner. Another one was create curiosity. He talked about how television series do a really good job on stringing you along from episode to episode. So they end with an episode with an unanswered question. And he suggested that we can do that again with our modules by posing these unanswered questions and then beginning the next module with it. Case in point, you may be wondering who Daniel's favorite rock band is. And you kind of want to know, and you're kind of hoping I will tell you, and maybe I will maybe I won't. It's just, and the point there is, there's that natural curiosity. People want the question answered. And by the way, it's rush. Another interesting point, give people choices. Of course you know that, right? You know, whether it's giving them a path through a course or whatever. But the thing he brought up is, once people have a choice, they tend to choose the harder of the two. And I wouldn't have thought that was true. So if you give them a choice, they're more apt, because they actually want to be challenged, to choose the harder one, which is really cool. I didn't know that. Another point, put your learner at risk. So, you know, he said, get them in the game. You know, if it's a scenario and if they screw up, make them pay a little bit. Make it hurt a little bit. But always give them that opportunity to succeed and, sort of win the prize. So that was the fourth one. And the last one was Art Cohn, who is a professor and studies, brain research. This one was called Transfer Learning and Becoming More Profitable. So Art's got a sort of interesting situation. He works with the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, in Zimbabwe on changing the sexual behavior of the Zimbabweans. They have a 42% HIV rate, which is just staggering. And so this one was about behavior change, and he talked a lot about retention. Obviously, if you're going to have transfer, you got to have retention first. So how do you aid retention, or how do you work against the mind forgetting? And a couple tips he gave was add an emotional tag to your content. He said the brain is really cued into the 4 F's. Fight, flee, food, and mating. So if you can tie your content into one of those, it gets that, the brain tags it as something especially important to remember. Another interesting point about recall is he said that, the more varied the situations in which the learner has to recall the information, the more apt they are to recall it. So if you ping your learner, whether it's through an email or something about something when they're at work or a certain situation at work, and then you ping them later about different situations, they're more apt to recall that information. And then he has this interesting sort of process he calls 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, where when he's teaching probably any course, but if he's teaching something on behavior change, 2 days after, he pings the learner and just asks them a basic multiple choice. What was the behavior we discussed 2 days ago? And then 2 weeks later, he pings them again, the learner that is. He pings the learner with a more, kind of like a mini scenario. Given this situation, what's the ideal behavior? How should you respond? And then 2 months later, assuming they've worked on it, he pings them again and asks, well, how did you apply it? And the cool thing is, he said, after that 2-month ping with how did you apply it, you have all this sort of evidence on the efficacy of your training. So there it is. Hope that was of some value, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks a lot.